Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We are presented by The Athletic. As you can see, I'm in a new office. We have decided to switch, my wife and I couldn't be more excited. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see there's actually a background now. I don't look like a crazy person with just white walls with nothing up anymore. It's very nice. Kane Pitman is with me. Kane and I are going to dive deep into NBA championship tiers. This is a wide open season. I think there are 13 teams that you can make a 1%er case for, at the very least, to win an NBA championship. So we're going to talk a little bit about those. Obviously, the teams at the bottom are going to get a little bit less time. The teams at the top are going to get a little more time. We're going to go in reverse order, 13-1, break them out into tiers, and talk about them that way. But first, let's talk about Kane. What's going on, buddy?
Well, it's good to be here, and we did hang out a few weeks ago, and we may have had a beer or two and talked basketball as we like to do. And I think we said, well, I don't know why we're not podcasting more in the same time zone, same city. So it's good. It's good that we can knock this out.
It makes life so much easier. And the good news is that I'm going to hop on Kane's podcast as well, Locked on Bucks. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about that. If you want to go find Kane over on Locked on Bucks, you can do that. Kane also does a million TV things, internet-based things for ESPN over here in Australia. Just a terrific dude, and I'm super excited to have him on the show. But first, I want to talk very quickly about the Brandon Miller thing at Alabama. Really, I don't even want to involve Kane. Kane has been stuck in a studio yesterday. He has not enough knowledge, basically, just because he was stuck in a studio yesterday. The draft is also not his thing. This is just going to be me talking very quickly. I'm very firmly in a wait and see mode with Brandon Miller at this point. It feels like yesterday we got the police in this preliminary hearing for Darius Miles and the person that committed this shooting, whose name is Michael Davis. We got the police on the stand who basically said that Brandon Miller was the person that brought the firearm to Darius Miles, who then handed the firearm to Michael Davis. Obviously, that is an incredibly bad look. Having said that, Brandon Miller is also not being charged with the crime. Every day there is new information coming out at this point. Just today, he had a statement released through an attorney basically detailing what happened that night. Alabama obviously is handling this incredibly poorly. Nate Oates just saying that Brandon Miller was in the wrong place at the wrong time on Tuesday was insane. It just was absolutely entirely tone deaf. I think that Nate Oates realizes that, hence why he made the second statement later that night. I just don't think we have enough information to where I can even talk about this in a way that makes any sort of real statement on it. It just seems that there's so much gray area. I know that people are jumping down Brandon Miller's throat, and I know that people are jumping down Alabama's throat. The fact that he hasn't been charged with anything, and that it seems like the police are treating him as a cooperating witness at this point, does at least want to make me give pause at this point. I'm not saying he didn't do anything wrong. I think very clearly him bringing this gun to the scene is wrong. And I would probably be in favor of Alabama holding him out of competition at this point, just because it seems like new information is coming out every single day now that this trial has begun and these preliminary hearings have begun. Even today, Greg Byrne, who is the Alabama athletic director, said that some of the information that came out yesterday was new information to Alabama. So if they wanted to sit him while this new information comes to light, I would totally understand that. I think that's very reasonable to do. But I also just don't want to really pile on yet, because I don't think we have enough information. I don't think we know enough. What we do know is that Alabama is handling this very, very poorly. And I think that Nate Oates needs to stop being maybe like a little bit defensive about this. I mean, a woman lost her life in this unfortunate crime. So don't treat it like it was a sprained ankle, like he seemed to yesterday at the press conference. That's basically all I have to say about that. I don't really know that I want to dive deeper into it at this point, just because it feels very complex and convoluted at this point. We will talk about it at a later date when more information comes to light, to be sure, but that's about as comfortable as I feel with anything on the subject right now. Let's move on to NBA title tiers, though, Kane. I want to start with this little 3-team tier at the bottom here. The number 13 team that I have is the New Orleans Pelicans. The New Orleans Pelicans, I am well aware that this team is 30-29 right now. Not a team that you would think really is in the mix heavily. Having said that, when Zion Williamson was healthy, this team was first in the Western Conference. They're 17-12 in the games that Zion Williamson has played this season. I at least had to throw them in. I at least had to very, very, very quickly mention them. So, Kane, I'll ask you this. As said at the top, the structure of this is going to be why this team can win the title, why they can't win the title. So I'll ask the first question. Kane, why can the New Orleans Pelicans win the 2023 NBA title?
They've got Williamson and Brandon Ingram, but you mentioned what their record is with Zion. I'm curious what their record is with Brandon Ingram, and then I'm curious what their record is with both of those players, because I don't think that they've played too much together this season. So even when they were winning games earlier in the year, they didn't have Brandon Ingram for a lot of that. They looked pretty decent defensively, and so I think they're a dangerous team if they're healthy. But they're also probably a year too early. And I don't think anyone thought at the start of the season they were going to be at the top of the Western Conference across the first month or two of the season. And ultimately now you are looking at, it's going to be almost 2 months. That might be best case with Zion has missed games with a hamstring. That is a very big hamstring. And there is significant concern, obviously, about his health moving forward. So that's a big one. That might be why they can win. It might also be why they can't win. But I think everyone has enjoyed watching this team this season of what they did earlier in the season. Obviously, they got a lot of fans here in Australia with Dyson Daniels and what he was able to do. And then he also got the injury bug. So they've had a bit of bad luck along the way.
So trivia time for Kane Pitman here. What
go.
Do you think the Pelicans net rating is in the minutes that Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, and CJ McCollum have played together this season?
Can I at least first have how many minutes they have actually played together?
I want to hold off on that because that is my second part of the point I'm going to make.
Okay. I think that they're around an even team on the season, which would make sense. They're around a 500 team.
Yeah.
So with those three guys on the floor, I figure they're going to be a positive. Let's just throw a rough number, a +7, +8.
They're a plus 14.9.
Yeah, there you go.
When Zion, Brandon Ingram, and CJ McCollum share the court. That's the reason that I think that this team is worth talking about in a title competition. Additionally, this is a team that has a lot of lineup versatility up and down the lineup. You can throw out guys like Najee Marshall, Dyson Daniels, Herb Jones that can be super high-level defenders. You can throw out bigs like Jonas Valanciunas if you want to try and bludgeon a team with him and Zion Williamson. You can play small and versatile if you want to play with Larry Nance and Zion in the front court that way. There are just a lot of different ways that I think this team can beat you. Having said that, the reason this team can't win the title is that those three guys have played 172 minutes together this season. It's not a lot of minutes, right? They're going to need some time, I think, to really ramp up when they play really great teams. And I think that that's really the main issue for me is that I don't really think I can trust Zion to stay healthy right now. I don't think I can trust Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum to totally stay on the floor together all as a unit at this point, just because we haven't really seen it yet. And until we see it, it's very hard to trust.
Yeah, totally agree. And the 170 minutes or whatever that number was that you mentioned there, I mean, what does the +14 even mean? That's why they are a theoretical team at the moment. But as I said, early in the season, they were one of the teams when I'm flicking through League Pass. I'm like, oh, the Pelicans are playing. Let's put them on because they're seriously entertaining. Defensively, they're still top 10 in the league because of the guys you mentioned with Herb Jones and all these guys that they can flick around, go small, go big. So the fact that they've had all those injuries and they're still top 10 defensively on the season shows that for the future, they've got the group of guys together that you can put together a winning team.
Okay. Number 12, I have the Sacramento Kings. The Sacramento Kings currently a robust 32-25 on the season. Frankly, maybe the most fun team I've watched all year. Have you enjoyed watching a team more than the Kings all season?
Well, not really. And that comes back to everyone talks about the way the NBA is these days. But ultimately, we love seeing teams get buckets, play fast, shoot the three. That's what the Kings do. They're entertaining every single time you watch them play.
Second best offense in the league. Definitely the most entertaining offense in the league. De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, just an incredible pick and roll, dribble handoff combination every single night. They have shooting around them. Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, Keegan Murray, Malik Monk, even guys like Trey Lyles are hitting threes. Terrence Davis is knocking down threes. It's just a ridiculous set of riches offensively for this group. But they don't defend. And this team is going to be very easy, I think, to cause problems against mismatch-wise in the playoffs when De'Aaron Fox is going to have to play. And De'Aaron has defended well this year, but I think that De'Aaron is going to be a guy that teams try to hunt, unfortunately. Domantas Sabonis is definitely going to be a guy that teams try to hunt. So essentially you have two guys in that same pick and roll action that are probably going to be hunted. Keegan Murray has been okay defensively. Kevin Huerter's been okay defensively. They just don't have a stopper really on that end. They don't really have someone that can stem the tide. That's where I struggle with this team. Like I had to put them on because they're 32-25 and one of the most fun teams to watch in the league. Do I think they can actually win the title? I'm pretty skeptical.
Well, they're third in the West, which is the crazy thing. Now, I know it's very, very close. So let me ask you this. So they're 32-25, and there's only 3.5 games. Well, you can go even further. There's 4.5 games back to the Jazz in 11th. So with 25 games to play, they're currently in third. Where do you think they end up? Because right now, to think about that, we can say that the profile doesn't look like a team that's going to have success in the postseason. But ultimately, right now, if it ended right now, they're a home court team in the first round, which is kind of crazy to think about.
So I will say the schedule, it gets a little bit tough for them, right? Like they do have this home game against the Blazers. They should win that on Thursday, but they go to the Clippers, to the Thunder twice. Then they have the Clippers again, the Timberwolves, the Pelicans, the Knicks, the Suns, the Bucks. Then they go on a 4-game road trip against the Bulls, Nets, Wizards, Jazz, and then home games against the Celtics and Suns. So that gets them to their 73rd game. That is really, really a hard schedule just because all of their tough games are at home. All of their easier games are on the road. I think there's just going to be some opportunities for them to pick up losses that maybe they shouldn't. And then on top of it, I wonder if their home court advantage, shout out the Sacramento fans, it's an unbelievable home court advantage, but like when you're playing tough teams, it's a 50-50 proposition. So I think they finish in the top 6. I do, but I think they make the playoffs straight up. I don't think they finish third though. I will say that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think and I kind of hope that they don't fall this far because I do want to see the Kings have a proper series and get in the postseason. As you said, the crowds are going to go crazy. They'll get at least two home games, but they would be a really entertaining and probably scary opposition in a playing game because of exactly what we spoke about. So that also would be pretty fun to see from obviously a complete neutral standpoint, but I'm sure Kings fans would like to avoid that if possible.
I think that's dead on. Okay. The Miami Heat are number 11. The Miami Heat have a proven track record of playoff success at this point on some level. They're 32-27. They are a great defense. The offense has been a bit of a mess. So Kane Pitman, why can the Miami Heat win the title?
They can win the title because we've seen that they've got proven playoff performers. And I think obviously Bam's gone to another level. We've seen Jimmy do it in the postseason. Now, he's also had some series where it hasn't quite worked out for him. He's getting older. The big question is obviously the Kyle Lowry stuff. And when you just look at the structure of the roster, he's supposed to be a top 3 guy. Is he that anymore in a postseason? I'm not sure. But they can still win because they have the defense, so they can turn series into half-court scraps where they want to be. They love that. They want to get in a hard physical half-court defensive game so the defense can carry them to wins in lower scoring games. But then you're going to need some vintage Jimmy Butler stuff. And that's the question for me, because then you're looking at guys like Tyler Hero, obviously can go off and win you a playoff game. But the reason they can win it is the defense, no doubt. They're still 5th in the league defensively, and no one's really spoken about them. They've kind of just been a periphery team all season long, which is kind of weird to say about Miami, but they are hovering in the mix of potentially getting themselves back in a home court scenario.
I think that they're an interesting group, if only because Jimmy Butler, when he's been on the court this year, has been awesome. 22 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. And like, he does have those moments where he just like completely takes over games still. Bam Adebayo's obviously taken a real leap. He is one of the 3 best defensive players in the league, in my opinion. The Kyle Lowry part of it is a problem, if only because their other perimeter option is Tyler Hero. And while Tyler Hero is a very good offensive player, he is a guy that will be hunted in the playoffs defensively. And while Tyler does have that great bubble season in the playoffs, he's proven that he will rise to the moment offensively, I think. I worry about what it looks like on defense for Tyler. They do have enough to cover for him, I would think, but just in general, it's a slog watching the Heat on offense, man. They have the 27th best offense in the league. Obviously, they're going to be getting Kevin Love, but I don't really know what to expect from Kevin Love at this point. I don't know that you can expect much more than, a couple of threes a game and hopefully insulating him on defense. That's really what it comes down to. They made the Eastern Conference Finals last year. Like, I kind of think that we can't sleep on them at this point. Like, we can't really sit down and just be like, they're out of it. I haven't really liked what I've seen for the most part this year, but Bam has taken a step. Jimmy hasn't dropped off at all. We might be sleeping on them a little bit, just maybe a small amount.
Currently 7th, so if it played out and all the seeding went the way it would, let's say they get in a series against Milwaukee. They've played each other a lot in the postseason. They know each other very well.
Yeah, how would you feel about that series?
I mean, and this is the thing, because they play defense, because they got Jimmy Butler, and they do have guys that can score quickly, I don't think they're the first round team you want. I mean, I know we're going to get to some of the other teams that are around this mix. I think that they would be on the lower ranks of the first round opponents you would want to see. But again, I don't think that Milwaukee should go into that series fearful that they can't beat the Heat because of the offensive stuff.
So the next tier for us, the 10th team, is Cleveland. So before I ask about Cleveland, would you rather, as a person who hosts a Milwaukee Bucks podcast, would you rather play Miami or Cleveland if you had to face one of them in the first round? Cleveland's not an option to play in the first round, really, because they're 38-23, but nonetheless.
Well, I don't think this would make anyone of the Cleveland fans happy. I think Cleveland, though, they're a younger team. They probably have the scariest player. Well, not probably, I will say. They got the scariest player, Donovan Mitchell, I think is the guy that you're most fearful of out of these two teams. But we'll probably get to Cleveland a little bit more. But just the short answer, probably Cleveland.
So the reason that I think I would rather play Miami if I was Milwaukee is because Cleveland's, and this is why I think Cleveland is like a legit team that can cause problems in the playoffs and can be like a very real concern for opposing teams and maybe even make a title run or a finals run. They have elite shot making with Donovan Mitchell, with Darius Garland, mixed with the best defense in the NBA right now. If you have elite shot making mixed with elite defense, including guys that like Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, can at least cause problems for guys like Giannis, like Jimmy Butler, like Bam Adebayo, like Joel Embiid. You have guys that can at least deal with some of the tougher matchups in the East, plus that elite shot making from Donovan Mitchell. I do feel like the Cavs are a problem for teams in the East, at the very least.
Yeah, I did a podcast with someone that covers the Cavs recently and asked them the question as well. One thing, and this is like this, people can say this is silly, but there's one thing that I do think when you're coming up against Giannis, and let's assume that Giannis is fully healthy, and hopefully he is. I think that there is something to having veteran guys that have been through the Giannis experience before over 7 games. And that's why you look at a team like Boston and Al Horford, Grant Williams, Miami, Bam Adebayo. They've seen each other in the playoffs 3 times in the last 5 years. And so that's why when you look at the Bucks and Cavs matchups through the season, you haven't seen a lot of Jared Allen. He's missed he went out of one of those games early. He missed another one of those games. So we actually haven't seen a lot of Mobley and Allen together trying to slow down Giannis. And I think you make a really good point. But I just have faith that, with the younger guys, I know Jared Allen isn't that young, but over the course of 7 games, if it gets to that, I have more fear for younger, more inexperienced players than I do the veterans.
I get that. I do. And I think that's a pretty reasonable and fair take on this, because Giannis is just a different beast in the playoffs, just in terms of the physicality. You have to be willing to get your ass kicked basically and deal with just getting pummeled in the paint for 7 straight games. And that's hard. That shit is hard to do in the playoffs. So I'm with you on why the Cavs are potentially a less difficult matchup maybe for the Bucks. You might have convinced me on this. You know what I mean? I think the Cavs, though, can cause problems for – it's weird. The Heat is – the East is this mix of matchups, right, on some level, where I think Boston matches up kind of well with everybody at the end of the day. But then Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Miami, these teams just have so many – it's all going to depend on who they play in terms of how difficult those series are. You might be right. Unless Donovan Mitchell gets scalding hot, or Darius Garland gets scalding hot, we'll be interested to see him in the playoffs as well. It could be hard for them. It could be hard for them to create enough offense at that level. The other thing is they just have a very strangely built roster where I worry that if they run into a team like Boston, for instance, and by the way, they would right now in the second round, given that they are the 4 seed, Boston is the 1 seed, it would be hard for them, because I think that Boston just has the size at the perimeter positions to cause mismatch problems for Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. I would be worried about that matchup if I was Cleveland, much, much, much more so than a Philly matchup or a Milwaukee matchup, where those teams are going to play a little bit bigger and almost play into my hands a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And the counterpoint of why the Cavs would maybe go in and a young team and think they can beat the Bucks is because I don't think there's great guard depth in Milwaukee. So sure, you want to put Drew Holiday on Donovan Mitchell, that's fine. But then as you pointed to, you've got Darius Garland as well. And just on the wing stuff with the Cavs, it's interesting because everyone was looking, who are they going to add? Are they going to do anything that's going to make them more versatile in the postseason? I don't really see anything that they were able to do there. No offense to our veteran friend that moved over to the Cavs, but I don't know. I think the wing stuff is going to be really, really hard. And the number 1 team that everyone's looking at in the East is Boston because of Tatum and Brown, and I just think that's really problematic.
Yeah, I mean, Danny Green looked fine in those early minutes. Didn't look great, I didn't think. We'll see. He's coming back from injury. It's possible that Danny Green bounces back and, looks like the Danny Green of old. But, Danny Green's not like a physical stopper either. For instance, if they play Jason Tatum, that's not something that I think Danny Green would be well suited to deal with anymore. So, the Cavs are in an interesting spot. Let's take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to get into some of these weird West teams that are remaining, because there are a lot of them. Okay, we're back at number 9. I actually have the Memphis Grizzlies. I know that they're second in the West. I know that Grizzlies fans, who I've built up a lot of goodwill with over the years, because I love this team so much and love the way they're built, love the way that this team is constructed and considered from a front office perspective. I'm a little bit worried about the way that they look right now. They're coming into the All-Star break, having struggled against a lot of the best teams in the West, basically after John Morant's comment regarding the fact that nobody in the West worries them. I think that a big part of that is that Steven Adams is out, but their defense has been much worse without Steven Adams. It has been considerably worse. So having said that, Steven Adams isn't really a guy that you can count on in the playoffs. Like he's going to get pulled away from the basket a little bit more often than you'd like to see. He is an offensive net negative in a playoff series. We've seen him get pulled off the court in the playoffs, unfortunately, in recent times. Kane, I will ask you, why can the Memphis Grizzlies win the NBA title?
Well, number one thing, defense again, and they've got a superstar first of all, but they are a really strong defensive team. They can play Jaren Jackson Jr. at the 5 if he can stay on the floor, which is also another problem. So the Steven Adams stuff, they do actually have a cover for. They've got a cover for that if they wanted to play him at the 5 there. So defensively, they can mix it. They honestly don't care. And I remember we hung out when we hung out a few weeks ago, and I said, "Do you think the Grizzlies are getting ahead of themselves? Are they doing a bit too much talking? Are they too openly confident?" And you said, "Nah, man, I love them." And I said,
"I do."
And I was like, "I'm not 100% sure." And I will say, over the last few weeks, I've thought about that conversation, and I've said, "You know what, Kane? You're not that old yet. You don't have to. You don't have to start hating the young team that's got a bit of confidence, because then everyone's boring." Like, so we love the Grizzlies the way they go about it, but the problem is they're not getting any free passes now. And they are super young, and every team wants to beat them. They've pissed everyone off, and I just have that causes me some real concern. But again, they've proven even throughout this rough stretch that they've had, and they're 4-7 since Steven Adams went out. And I agree with you to the thought that Steven Adams is like this key piece that has maybe contributed in a big way to them going on this rough stretch is kind of crazy to think about. Maybe they need that veteran, that adult in the room out on the floor during these games. I'm not 100% sure, but even throughout that, they're still second in the West. So that's why they can win, because they are in a great position to be one of the top seeds, and they have an elite defense.
So here's the thing, some more trivia time for Kane Pitman here. What do you think that the Memphis Grizzlies, in the 1,600 minutes that they've played when Steven Adams is off the court, what do you think their net rating is?
I was looking at some numbers yesterday, not those numbers though. I was looking at all the rebounding stuff, which has been pretty catastrophic without Steven Adams. Yeah. So I would have to suggest that the defense has been worse. I'm not 100% if that's accurate, but just thinking aloud. So the net rating with Steven Adams off, you're saying?
The net rating with Steven Adams off the court.
I think it'll be about even. I think they're around +5 in the season. I think they're even in the regular season, because they've still won a lot of games.
Yeah, so they are -0.1 with Steven Adams off the court. In the 1,100 minutes Steven Adams has played, they're +9.9. It is an enormous difference for them with Steven Adams on the court.
So how do you feel about that? Because you're right. So there's two problems here for the Grizzlies, because if Steven Adams plays, then in the postseason, then you're right. There will be teams that'll be like, all right, you want to play Adams and Jaren Jackson Jr., that's not really going to work. Steven Adams is probably the one that goes off. I think everyone agrees with that. But then if they've fallen in this humongous hole without Steven Adams, is that why you've got them so low on this tier, I guess, is the question I'm asking.
It is. I'm a little bit worried about that. I'm also a little bit worried that these numbers are like a touch noisier than what you would hope, because it's actually the offense that falls off a substantial amount, not the defense. And I think in part it is because of Steven Adams' immense impact on their offensive rebounding. Steven Adams, when he is on the court, they get 34% of their misses. When he's off the court, they get 24% of their misses. He also has an enormous impact on their defensive rebounding rate, which obviously impacts their transition attack in terms of their offense as well. So the fact that Steven Adams has this big of an impact is concerning. I will say, minutes with Jaren Jackson on the court, Steven Adams off the court, the team is +11.6 this year. So there is a case that they can get away playing Jaren Jackson at the 5 with someone like Brandon Clark, with someone like Santi Aldama. I worry about if they can't even play Steven Adams like 10 to 15 minutes, do they have the depth in terms of matchup potential to be able to really cause problems for opposing teams? I don't know. I don't really know the answer to that at this point, but I do know that I think they're a little bit easier to stop offensively than what we've even seen in the recent past. And part of that is that the numbers are a little bit skewed. Desmond Bane has missed some time, right? Desmond Bane's so critical for their offense. Jaren Jackson obviously missed time early in the season as well. But it feels like to me that when you're in a playoff series, you're basically just going under every Ja Morant screen, especially when Steven Adams is on the court. You're saying, hey, beat us from three. And I don't know if Ja Morant can do that yet. Just being real with it. He's gotten better as a shooter. I don't know if I trust him to beat teams from three if they just go way under the screen every single time. And if it's that easy to stop you when your offense is already a little bit predictable, maybe in the half court is the way to put it, I worry about what that looks like in a tough series against really, really good shot creators, wing defenders, guys like that.
As I said, you've turned me. I want them to go on a long run now because I think
I do too.
The longer they go in the postseason, the more talk there's going to be. It's going to be better drama. It's going to be all the stuff that we love in the postseason. Yes. Let's face it, we all want to see Ja. We want to see Ja get to the conference finals, and we'll get to some of the teams they might face.
All these dudes. Forget Ja.
Right.
Like Dylan Brooks, the amount of shit that dude's going to talk.
What's your Dylan Brooks take? What's your Dylan Brooks take? Because when you talk about the offense and maybe some of the ways they can be stopped, the shot selection stuff that everyone talks about, how do you feel about it?
I don't love it, but I like it when it goes in.
Yes.
like it's weird. Like they kind of need that dude who's just like a super confident shot creator from the wing to be able to do that when like the clock is running low in half court settings, right? I think they're one guy away still. I do. I think they're a wing shot creator away, which is why, for instance, I loved the idea of them trying to go get Mikal Bridges, right? Like I think that they should have offered the world to the Brooklyn Nets. And I think the report was they did offer basically the world to the Brooklyn Nets. I think that's the exact guy that they could have really used. Someone like Mikal Bridges, I think makes perfect sense for the Memphis Grizzlies moving forward, but that's their next thing. They need to find the great wing for their roster because without that, and with Dylan Brooks being as integral to their late shot clock creation as he is, I obviously have some well-founded, I would say, concerns regarding how that's going to look in terms of efficiency in the playoffs. The number 8 team for me is the Dallas Mavericks. And it might look a little bit weird to have the Mavericks ahead of the Memphis Grizzlies, but this team went to the conference finals last year with Luka Doncic. They now have Kyrie Irving, who those two together already look great on offense. They look phenomenal to me. Like the way that has mixed together has just been perfect. It's the dream of everything that I hoped. Kane, I would imagine to you, that is why they can win the NBA title, right?
Yeah, I was going through these teams in the West and sometimes because of the stuff that we've said, that some of the numbers are really hard to track and guys have missed games and maybe in some instances guys have moved teams. But if you talk about having two guys, but without completely sidetracking us here, one really quick question, because when you talk about having two guys, you just spoke about the Grizzlies. We had the Pelicans below the Grizzlies. So let's just say both those teams are fully healthy. Who do you think can go on a deeper run in the postseason?
I don't know that it's fair to expect full health from the Pelicans at this point. So I just want to say that. Like, I obviously I have the Grizzlies ahead. I would say the Grizzlies. Yeah. Full health, I would take the Pelicans. I think the Pelicans are a harder matchup problem night in, night out. Plus, they're deeper. I think that they have more high-end talent. We just haven't seen enough of it yet for me to trust it. In theory, I would take the Pelicans. In practice, I think that the Grizzlies are probably more likely.
Yeah, agree. And so the reason I brought that up just then is because, like, when you're looking at Kyrie and Lucas, so can they win? Of course, yeah, because those two guys are terrifying. The Clippers with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, the Phoenix Suns with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. So, like, that and Denver with Jokic and Jamal Murray as well. So that's why if you have at least two guys, the question becomes, like, what does depth matter? And we had Tim McMahon on one of our shows last week. And he said, we obviously, from an Australian perspective, we got into the Josh Green stuff. He's made a real leap this year. He's been fantastic. The Dorian Finney-Smith trade obviously opens up room for Josh Green to come into the lineup, start, play major minutes. He'll be getting those defensive assignments because Dallas is not a good defensive team. But the way Tim put it, I think was perfect. He said, Josh Green is the third best player on the Mavericks right now. And that's great. That shows how Josh Green has risen. It shows that he's going to make a heap of money, and he now gets to do stuff that he just simply couldn't do in the past. But is it the best thing for the Dallas Mavericks? Maybe not if you're entering the postseason. So then it comes to the question of, you can have superstar talent. They've got a superstar duo, but what does depth mean in the postseason? I don't think it means that much past your 6th or 7th player. But when you get to your 3rd player and you're like, there's a bit of a drop off here, I think that's where the concern obviously starts.
Where depth matters in the playoffs to me is in terms of matchups, right? Being able to find different mismatches, being able to find different marginal advantages while minimizing the marginal advantages that opposing teams can create for you. This is why, to me, the most important Dallas Maverick right now is Maxi Kleber. Right. All due respect to, I mean, look, Luka Doncic is obviously the most important Dallas Maverick. Yeah. Kyrie is incredibly important, but the swing guy for them, the X factor for them, so to speak, is Maxi Kleber, because Maxi Kleber is an absolutely terrific defender who also can knock down corner threes at a really high level. He's an incredibly important piece for them because he's a two-way player on a roster that doesn't really have them anymore. Like Luka Doncic, when he's locked in, he's actually pretty okay defensively. Like I think he'll be fine in the playoffs. Kyrie, there are moments where he's okay defensively, but he's just small and can be taken advantage of in terms of mismatches that way. Christian Wood can't defend. We just need to be real about that. Like, just not a good defensive player. It's hard when your top 3 guys are not plus defenders in some way. So then you have to go down the roster. Like Reggie Bullock has had a pretty good year offensively. He's been okay defensively. Maxi Kleber has missed a ton of time. He played their first 22 games. Josh Green has been a good defender this year. He's energetic. He's athletic. He gets up and down in transition. I think he's a great transition partner for Kyrie when Kyrie tries to push the pace. I don't know. How do you feel about Josh Green having to guard like the opposing team's best player in the playoffs night in, night out? I think he does a better job on like guards and like smaller wings than he does on like, bigger guys like Kawhi Leonard, Paul George. You can go up and down the list in terms of some of the guys they could run into in the West. I'm a little bit worried about how Josh Green looks in those settings for as good as Josh Green has been this year. And he's been great over his last 12 games. He's been like utterly critical to what they've done. He's averaging like 13 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.5 turnovers, shooting 52% from the field, 37% from 3. Like, enormous player. The leap that he's taken has been huge and probably allowed them to feel okay about moving Dorian Finney-Smith. But when you lose Dorian Finney-Smith, you lose the guy that can guard up the lineup. And that's what worries me.
Yeah, I totally get the trade. I understand why they did it. I think it does make them more dangerous because, even still, they would have still had problems with depth. They still would have had the questions about the big man. So now you at least have another superstar in the lineup. And we've seen them have some close games with those two down the stretch, and they're still going to figure some stuff out. But I always just have concerns when you look at, again, the better teams. It's like, well, you need guys that can defend 2 through 4 in the postseason. And when you're relying on guys that, for the most part, get their stuff done on the defensive end and they're minimal players on offense, I just think that it limits you. It's hard for me to look at the Dallas Mavericks and put them in the same category as some of the other teams we're about to get to, which is probably why you've got them on your tier list here. So I think they're dangerous. I think they'll be scary to play in a series because of those two guys, but it would need to be one hell of a run for those two guys for them to get to the conference finals and beyond.
Yeah, so like their best lineup in the playoffs, my bet is going to be Kyrie and Luka with Josh Green, Reggie Bullock, and Maxi Kleber. And then they use Christian Wood in big moments. He plays 25 minutes a night and just hope that he doesn't get played off the court defensively, right? There are probably ways that you can actualize Christian Wood to be able to do that. And having him with Kyrie and with Luka, who are real pick and pop partners, real pick and roll partners, it's going to be really hard to stop Christian Wood in the playoffs on offense. He just needs to not give away as many points as he's scoring, and we'll see. There are moments where he locks in and things go okay. he's a big factor for them. We'll see, but I think Maxi's a bigger factor for them.
They don't have the Kings don't have the star power, but if you just look at the profile, offense, defense, they're Kingsy. They're Kingsy.
They are a little bit Kingsy. I think they have a little bit more just in terms of defense than the Kings do. The defensive upside, maybe, but it's close. You're right. It is close. Okay. Number 7 for me now. The Los Angeles Clippers. I have at 7. This team has moved up into the top 4 in the West right before the All-Star break. Everyone is so close, so it almost doesn't matter. But this formula is pretty simple in terms of why they can win the title, right? It's you have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George mixed with the top 10 defense.
Yep, and just quietly, Kawhi has played 28 out of the last 36 games. The minutes with Paul George, predictably very good. We know they can defend, but offensively, the offensive rating is 121 with those two on the floor. Now it's been around 700 minutes. I don't think they really care where the minutes are entering the postseason as long as they play some games heading in there. So they're on the right path. So that's obviously why the Clippers can win the title. They remind me, and I don't know how many Australians you've got listening to this podcast, Sam, but if anyone has any idea about the NBL, there's a team, Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, that are always a theoretical team. Now, they're terrible defensively, so it's not a perfect comparison. But they are the team that I always, every season, get tricked into thinking, I think they can win the title. And they never do. Yeah. And so I'm like that with the Clippers. Love them. Questionable some of the stuff they've done in the last week, which I'm sure we'll get to. But the Kawhi and Paul George theoretical superstar duo can win you a title, no doubt.
Yeah, so they're a plus 10.5 in those minutes that Kawhi and Paul George have played, which is enormous. You can trust those two when they're on the court to be great. Obviously, there's the when they're on the court factor, and that's enormous with Kawhi. Can Kawhi consistently play every single night in the playoffs? I think he'll try at the very least, and I think there's a good chance he can. What worries me with them is their offense just gets so stagnant, and it just gets so ball stoppery. And this is where the Russell Westbrook thing comes in, what you just alluded to. I understand the theory of why the players on this team think that they need someone that can push up tempo, right? I get it on some level because this team can go very slow, and having someone that can push the pace and try and create easy offense for them would be valuable. The problem for me is more in the half court that they're very stagnant. They just really, really don't move the ball at all. It's why Terrence Mann, I think, has been awesome. Is like the quote unquote starting point guard for them because he keeps the ball moving. He's completely unselfish in a way that they desperately need from someone at that position. Maybe Russell Westbrook comes in and he's been humbled in some way by his experience with the Lakers and playing with a very close friend of his in Paul George, continuing to get to live at home in Los Angeles, which I think really matters to him, getting to play in front of basically his people, right, in Los Angeles. He does have a very real fan base in that city, regardless of how it went. He's a personal fan base in that city, even though the Lakers did not go well. So I get it. All of this to say is I do get it from them in terms of their perspective of why they thought this could make sense. I just think that it's going to be too ball stoppery, and they're probably going to end up riding with guys like Eric Gordon, guys like Terrence Mann at the end of the day in the playoffs when the big possessions come down to it, just because that's what's going to be a little bit more functional to get Paul George and Kawhi Leonard the ball.
Yeah, that'll be the question. And I would love particularly because he's gone from the Lakers to the Clippers, I would love a Westbrook redemption tour here and they go on a run.
It would be the coolest story. It would be the coolest story in the NBA, I think.
It would be really, really fun. So I would love to see it. But they also made a trade for Plumlee, which, by the way, I don't mind. You got to have, we've seen games with the Clippers as well where if Zubats is fouled out or he's unable to play for some reason, they just had nothing behind it. So I get it. That's fine to bring in another center. But the problem is no Reggie Jackson, no Kennard, shooters as well. And then you bring in the Westbrook. And if you're going to play Westbrook, in theory, if you have Zubats on the floor, maybe it's Plumlee, you're always going to have two non-shooters that the defense isn't too worried about. Now, can Westbrook do some stuff in pick and roll. Will he ever be a screener?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know whether that's going to happen. He's not on the huge contract anymore, but I highly doubt. I've heard some people say, well, it's a no-risk move. They can just cut him. I mean, I do not see that happening this close to the postseason. So they're going to ride this out. What disruption does that have? Who knows?
Yeah, and look, I don't see that happening just because I think that Paul George and Russell Westbrook are close, and that's just not the way this works. This is a move that it'll be a part of their story here moving forward. To me, their best line, like if you want to try and actualize Russ, their best lineup is probably Russ, Norman Powell, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and Marcus Morris. And that takes Ivica Zubac off the court. It makes them a worse defensive team. Does that work? I don't really know. I'm not totally sure. Maybe you can try and play Terrence Mann instead of Norman Powell to get a little bit more defensive ability on the court. Maybe you can try and play Robert Covington a little bit, but his shooting has been very hit or miss over the last few years. I don't know. I think that it's going to be hard. I think that they're going to end up having to really play a lot of lineups with Eric Gordon and Terrence Mann at the one, or Norman Powell. You could even play like Powell, Kawhi, Paul George, Zubac, and Morris. Maybe like there are ways to make it work. It's just going to be very complicated. I think the Plumlee move, I think they just needed 12 minutes a night. They needed 12 minutes a night for a backup center, someone that can run dribble handoff, someone who can provide instant rim running and dexterity offensively. Makes sense to me, right? Eric Gordon might be big for them. And I frankly don't know how much Eric Gordon has left in the tank based off of his stint in Houston.
I think he'll be happier. I mean, some of those press conferences have been pretty classic over the last year or two with Eric Gordon. I'm happy for him, man. I'm happy for him that he got out of there. He's going to play some playoff basketball. But they've got a bunch of guys. So I guess maybe that's the point. While I'm focusing on having, maybe two non-shooters on the floor, you might be right. They can mix and match. They can figure some things out. And who are the guys in the West? I mean, Jokic, obviously, but it's not like there's an Embiid and a Giannis that, maybe they can go small. Maybe that's the way they do go.
Yeah, I think they can theoretically go small as long as against the Nuggets, they'll have to go bigger. But the Nuggets don't, they have Aaron Gordon, but do you trust KCP against one of Paul George or Kawhi Leonard? That's what it's going to come down to on some level, right? Maybe that can work. I don't know. We'll see. It's going to be tough. Let's go to number 6. I have the Warriors at number 6 still. This is a team that has not been great this season. They're 29-29. This team also won the title last year. In Stephen Curry's games so far this season, they're still only like 20-18, which is a little bit bizarre, but it just feels like they're kind of biding their time till the playoffs, right? I don't have them in the top tier. That feels like my concession to the fact that they've sucked this year for the most part, but I do trust that they're going to get there again and get that intensity back when the playoffs roll around.
Every time I listen to someone talk about the Warriors, it's kind of like, yeah, I think that they can figure it out.
Yeah.
They'll work it out. They'll get there. They're the champs. And I totally understand that. But you would like to see something before we get to the postseason. And we've only got 20 games left because right across the board, you got the weird home road splits. They are just basically a 0 net rating. I think it's 0.1. So they've just been absolutely a 500 team. And Steph's only played, in the 30s for games. Jordan Poole has played more minutes than anyone, which is interesting. He hasn't had a great shooting season. Klay Thompson hasn't had a great shooting season. But when Steph has played and he's been healthy, he was right in the MVP mix and still absolutely looks like he's in his prime. So sometimes it's pretty simple. Why can they win? They've got the experience. They've got the veteran guys. They won it last year when all season long, I didn't necessarily think they were a team that was going to go and win the title. So we've got that in our memory. That's why we think we can win it. But all season long, we've seen a team that has been absolutely middle of the pack. And there's reasons why. They haven't got the boost from the younger guys that I think that they were hoping for. And some people probably talked themselves into. So I think that is a little bit of a concern. Like, where is the end for this? I'm not 100% sure. But Steph, if he can stay healthy, he still looks like he's in his prime.
Yeah, like the big question for me is how often do these teams that basically just kind of flounder along during the regular season, how often do they find a way to turn it on? Like I've heard people bring up the 2017 and 2018 Cavs teams under Ty Lue, like the 2 years after they won the title. Those teams still won 50 games. Like those teams were actually like a little bit better than what I think people remember. It's hard to find examples of teams that generally really, really struggled throughout the regular season and then just decide, oh yeah, you know what? We're just going to turn it on. It's all going to be good. We're going to be fine. That's the case against this team. The case for them is that they have Stephen Curry. Stephen Curry is unbelievable. Stephen Curry was in the midst of one of his best seasons of his career before his injury. He's averaging 29 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, while shooting 49.5 from the field, 43 from 3 on 11 attempts per game, and 92% from the line. That's just insane. Like, can you imagine being able to do that, Kane?
Well, no, it's going to surprise you, but no, I can't imagine being able to do that. And he probably should be shooting more. That's the crazy thing.
Yeah. I mean, he's finally like really just like gone nuts. He's just like jacking up threes. Like it's crazy. I mean, look, I think the craziest year was, what was it? It was the year that he led the league in scoring. I think it was 21, right? I think he jacked up like 13 or 12 a game or something insane. He's not quite at that level yet, but I think that that's where we're going with this team. And there's still a really hard matchup with their best 5 on the court: Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andrew Wiggins, one of Kevon Looney or Jordan Poole, depending on the matchup. I think that it is really, really hard to match up with that team. I think it's going to be really, really hard to try and manage. Like, to me, like that's the team that worries me most for the Suns almost, is them, just because they have multiple big bodies they can throw at guys like Devin Booker, like Kevin Durant. Then they have the help defense potentially with Kevon Looney, who can also match up with DeAndre Ayton and frustrate him with offensive rebounds. Like if I was the Suns, that's probably the team I would want to most avoid, weirdly. But if I was a team like, like Memphis or something like that, I might just think I can like drive it down their throat all game. And that might be wrong, but I felt like Memphis matched up with them pretty well in the playoffs last year. So it's going to be interesting.
As much as they've been a 500 team, 3.5 games back of the Kings in the 3rd seed. And as we've gone through all these teams, that's why we've had some of the Western Conference teams below the Warriors, because the only teams, even though we say there's concern, even though we say, well, geez, you'd like to see something before you get to the postseason, the only teams for me, which sounds like it matches up with what you've got, that I categorically say, I think these teams are ahead of them right now, are the Nuggets and the Suns. So through all this, the Western Conference has been such a mess that they're actually still right there. They just need to rip off a little bit of a run here, get Steph Curry back healthy. And the other point is Wiggins was another one of the guys that was the bridge and was so important in the NBA Finals last year. And he's only played 37 games as well. So these guys have just missed a lot of games. And as far as the data, I don't know. What does the road stuff mean? Is this just an old team that can't be bothered on the road? To be 22-7 at home and 7-22 on the road. I think the Philadelphia 76ers did this around 2018-19, something like that, where their road splits. But that felt more like, I'm not sure if this team likes each other. I don't know. I mean, that was the last year of Brett Brown, I think, and it was just a lot of stuff going on. For the Warriors, I don't necessarily think it's that. I think it might be just like some sort of weird veteran team struggling through the grind of the regular season.
Yeah, and look, like it's also very possible the Gary Payton addition could be very helpful for them if he can get healthy, especially late in the season, especially in the playoffs. We saw what kind of difference maker he can be on the defensive end, just in terms of energy during that season. But let's move on to this top tier here, this top group of NBA potential champions. I'm going to upset Denver fans, but I have Denver at number 5. I know that they're first in the West. I currently have 3 teams in the East ahead of them, and I have 1 team in the West ahead of them. I love watching Nikola Jokic. I don't think Nikola Jokic is their problem in the playoffs. If you look at his track record of success, it's unbelievable. His numbers go up in the playoffs consistently. He has been awesome in the playoffs. That dude, I have full faith in him. It's kind of everything else. Jamal Murray's coming back. He's looked greater over the course of this last little stretch before the All-Star break. That's big. But Michael Porter Jr. might not be a part of their best lineups and their closing lineups at times. Aaron Gordon's been phenomenal. I really trust Aaron Gordon. But like, do they have enough defensive depth? Like, they have two guys that I really, truly trust on defense in Aaron Gordon and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Bruce Brown can be effective defensively, but Bruce Brown is a non-shooter. And if you put both he and Aaron Gordon on the court, I worry the teams will just kind of condense the court a little bit when Jokic is in that mid-range area and try to make him a little bit less efficient than what we've seen throughout the course of the season. He's an incredibly difficult guard. It might not matter at this point. He might just be a cheat code. But I think that's my worry on why they might not be able to win the title. I don't know that they have enough defensive depth. I thought what they desperately needed to do at the deadline was just go and get more defensive depth. Go and get guys that can be two-way players. They didn't do it. They went out and got Thomas Bryant.
Yeah, which is funny because everyone's like, well, yeah, I mean, they needed, how many minutes can Jokic play in the postseason? Is he going to play 45 minutes a game and then you go small? I don't know. I mean,
I can't play Thomas Bryant in the playoffs. Like,
well, that's right. I saw the stuff about DeAndre Jordan. It's like, well, let's be honest. That didn't really matter. That wasn't a big picture problem for this team regardless. Regular season, obviously, it's been disastrous. The reason they can win it, you mentioned Jamal Murray, and we're kind of on the same page here. The reason they can win it, last 15 games, he's been awesome. 28 points, 8 assists. The shooting splits are outrageous, 52, 43, 90. So he's been crazy over his last 15 games. And I have him as the reason they can win it because they need someone to come along for the ride with Jokic, because I already expect that Jokic is going to do what he's going to do. Defensively, the half-court stuff is where I had. So I totally agree with you. But 20th in half-court defense, that's per clean in the glass. And it only feels like it's going to get worse in the postseason. Again, I keep talking about these two players, but Dallas Clippers, Phoenix, if you get that matchup, I'm just like, man, this is really tough. I don't know whether they have enough guys that can defend those positions that I can trust across the series, across 7 games in the half court, when it's already been a problem through the regular season.
It has. I mean, look, if you look at their overall numbers, they're 13th in defensive rating, but they really drop off when you take one of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope or Aaron Gordon off the court. It becomes much more difficult. They're at like 118 or so, I believe, if you take one of those two off the court. And part of that is that, like, when you take one of those two off the court, you're typically replacing them with like Bones Highland or something like that, right? It's hard. That's really, really hard to do. Bones Highland was really, really bad defensively for them. DeAndre Jordan was really bad defensively for them early on in the season as well. I don't know. I just worry about them being too easy to match up with, too easy to force difficult mismatch issues for in the playoffs. But it might not matter. If Jamal Murray is back to being Jamal Murray and being as good as we think that he can be prior to his injuries, he might be great. I mean, you look at his last 13 games, he averaged 26 points, 7 assists, 5 rebounds. It was ridiculous. He was shooting 44% from 3. Missed those last few games before the All-Star break, but man, has he been good. He has been unbelievable.
I was curious as the season wore on and heading into the trade deadline, and we saw the Jay Crowder stuff, and I'm sure we'll talk about him a bit later, but even a guy like that didn't cost a lot, would have been at least helpful to have another body for this team for some of those matchups. Is it something that really tilts the scale in a title? I don't know, probably not. But having another one of those guys you could put out defensively could have helped. I'm not sure if they're involved in that at all. Reggie Jackson, any excitement? I see in the comments here we've got a Reggie Jackson. I think, again, you talk about the Bones Highland stuff, and I'm not saying they're the same player, but if you play him alongside Jamal Murray, I think, again, you still obviously have some defensive concerns.
I agree. Reggie Jackson was not very good this year, and maybe he can be a little bit better. He's probably a little bit better in terms of like a backup point guard option, but I actually kind of sneaky like the lineups they've used with like Bruce Brown as that option. I think that's been pretty fun, is like him being kind of a pseudo lead initiator at times. So I don't know. We'll see what they look like. They're a great team. They're a great offensive team, an unbelievable offensive team. They just need to prove that they have the defensive depth. They could absolutely win the title. That's why they're in this top tier of contenders. I think I trust a team like the Philadelphia 76ers a little bit more. I think the 76ers are a great defensive team. They are currently top 5 in the NBA in defense. They are top 10 in offensive rating. They have Joel Embiid, who is arguably the most dominant shot creator for himself in the NBA. He's averaging 33 points a game. He's been critical for them defensively. In the minutes where he's played defensively, they're just phenomenal. 20 points per game from Tyrese Maxey. And then on top of it, you have James Harden being able to sink back just a little amount and not be so relied upon in the playoffs, which I think is going to be absolutely enormous for him in terms of his efficiency, in terms of his overall just competence in the playoffs. They're going to have to prove that they can defend on the perimeter as much as anything. Guys like Tyrese Maxey coming off the bench. James Harden doesn't have a great defensive track record in the playoffs. They're going to have to prove that they can make it work in ball screens, that ball screen defense isn't just going to be a sieve for them. But man, I don't know, man. Like I love this team. I think everyone is kind of sleeping on them a little bit.
Yeah, probably me too. And they obviously went on a run lately here, and I think Harden has had an underrated season. I know he wasn't too happy about not making the All-Star game, but defensively they can be elite. Their best five, I think, has pretty good balance, better than it did last year. You put Maxey in there with Harden and Embiid. I like when Harris can be your fourth guy rather than be your second or third. You feel a lot better about that. And then PJ Tucker. The only thing I'll say is Tucker's probably, and I say this every year, and I've said this for the last 3 years, so maybe I should just get over it, but it feels like he's had to play a lot. Like he has played a lot of minutes this year. If he has another postseason run in them, then, because I think he's going to be key, because he unlocks a lot of the stuff you're talking about. You go back to a couple of years to the title. He was actually defending guards. He was out on the perimeter. So does he have that in him at 37 years old? I'm not sure, but that will be a big key for him and for the Sixers defensively. I think you might have mute.
I did. Yes. PJ Tucker's been a total zero offensively for them this season.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is a problem. And if they can get enough from him defensively to keep him on the court in terms of being like that mismatch guy, that like he's stopping the opposing star player every night, maybe they can get enough. It's tough because I liked what Tobias Harris did in the playoffs last year, kind of sneakily. Like I thought he got better defensively, but you can't have him be the guy that's the stopper, right? You can't have him be the main guy. I thought he did a good job on Pascal Siakam last year, but like you can't have him be the main stopper, right? I just don't think that works for him.
Yeah, and as we've seen this over the years, and I see someone commenting in the stream that they've got a lot to prove, and I think that that's also part of it. And there was a comment that Embiid made recently where he's like, I just want to get through the postseason healthy and not have one of these crazy injuries, and he gets these random illnesses and gets hit in the face and all this kind of stuff. So again, if we're talking about reasons why they can't win it or reasons why teams are sleeping on them, it's because they haven't been able to. It's because they haven't been able to prove it. They haven't even got out of the second round. And if you look at the way the standings are matching up right now, the Sixers would be on a collision course with the Bucks in the second round. This has been a series that everyone has kind of looked at and thought maybe they would match up in the postseason at some point. They haven't yet, though. But I would say the Sixers, I think, would like the matchup against the Bucks. I think that they would like the Embiid stuff. I know the Bucks are an elite defensive team, but if you got Milwaukee and Philadelphia in the second round, how are you feeling about that? Because I do think historically the Sixers Celtics matchup is maybe one that concerns them a little bit more than Milwaukee.
What do I think of Milwaukee? I kind of think that as long as PJ Tucker can at least manage tough physical minutes on Giannis. I think that they have the kind of team that is tougher for Milwaukee to deal with, because Joel Embiid is that backline center is huge. Like having Joel being able to, that's how you have to guard Giannis. You have to have the guy who can body up with him just right at the start. And then you have to have the backline secondary defensive player who can protect the rim and make it a 1-on-2 scenario. And Giannis is going to win that 1-on-2 a good amount of the time, right? Because that's who he is. But yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I have Philly and Milwaukee neck and neck, and we can talk about Milwaukee now because I have Milwaukee at number 3. And man, it really just all comes down to knowing whether or not Chris Middleton's going to be that dude for me. Like, we started to get it just a little bit right before the All-Star break, didn't we? We started to get it just a small amount before the All-Star break, where we saw Chris Middleton start to come into his own a little bit more. With him, with the way that they're playing right now, they've won their last 12 games. They've been phenomenal. With him, with the run that they're on, man, I think that they can win the title for sure. And I think they probably, I don't know, would you have them as the favorite if you knew for sure that Chris Middleton was going to be at 100%?
Maybe. I mean, right there with Boston
too.
Yeah, right there with Boston. If it was in a perfect world, but if it's in a perfect world, then you probably think Phoenix is higher as well. And I know we'll obviously get to the Phoenix Suns. So the problem for the Bucks all season has been offense. They haven't been good anywhere on offense. Their transition stuff hasn't even been good, which is hard to believe. With Giannis in the lineup, the half-court stuff has been horrific. So a lot of that, you pin it down and say, well, Middleton hasn't been there. He's only played 17 games. But as far as his scoring, the three-point shot hasn't come back. I think he's at around 28%. But
you think that'll be fine, though, right? Like,
I think
he'll
so.
shoot eventually.
He's got such a flat shot as it is. Maybe there's some leg stuff there. But yeah, if they're healthy, I think they're better positioned this year for a Boston matchup than they were last year, because obviously you add in Chris Middleton. They added Jay Crowder, yet to be determined what he has to bring to the table, but it's another body. And then Joe Ingles, look, he hasn't been great defensively, but he has added something to the offensive half-court stuff, particularly pick and roll, incorporating some different guys. So I just think they have a better mix this year if healthy.
Well, sneakily, kind of similar to the conversation we had about the Clippers, this is an offense that like stagnates pretty regularly without Chris Middleton, right? Like, they have the bailout option that is Giannis is impossible to stop point blank. So you can just give him the ball, 16 feet away from the rim, and he'll probably get to the rim, right? That's an option that the Clippers, instead of that, we'll give the ball to Paul George or Kawhi 28 feet away from the rim and have them shoot a mid-range jumper or a pull-up three. And the Giannis stuff is just more efficient at this point, right? Now, again, do they have enough shot? It really comes down to shot creation for me, like being able to find different shot creators outside of Giannis. If, Chris Middleton not being helped, like Chris Middleton is their guy. He is like almost the marginal cheat code for them that makes it work. Like, Drew Holiday has had a great year. Do you trust him in the playoffs if he has to like be the primary perimeter option as an on-ball threat?
Well, the problem with Drew Holiday, I mean, historically, even in the championship run, he was not great offensively. He had decent moments, but his shooting was not great and well down on the regular season. I think part of the problem is in the postseason, you're asking him to do so much defensively.
Yeah.
And I think that takes a toll. So
it's absolutely right.
This team doesn't have a point guard, a true point guard. So there are just some complexities with trying to get the offense, the half-court offense ticking. They can be seriously turnover prone because Giannis, Drew, and Chris can all give the ball away, which has been a problem as well. So the big question is the offense, and why they can win it is obviously Giannis, but they're also absolutely elite defensively.
Well, they lose the turnover battle just badly every night, right? Because their defense, like, it's just not what their defense is based on. They don't try and force turnovers. They try and play very solid and steady and drop and try and, just keep everything in front of them. And then, of course, as you said, like, Giannis averages 4 turnovers a game. Drew Holiday averages 3 turnovers a game, right? So it gets a little bit tricky from time to time. What do you think of this team's depth? Because that is almost the critical thing for me outside of Middleton. Can they find the right mix of guys to get 48 minutes basically from 2 positions, right? They have to get 96 minutes from a mix of Pat Connaughton. I guess Bobby Portis will play some of those minutes. Joe Ingles might play some of those minutes. Like Marjon Beauchamp, is he an option? Like, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to find it's hard to find all of the minutes they need to make.
I think that they looked at the series with Boston last year and And I've been honestly pretty strong on. Look, I think Grayson Allen has gotten better. I think that he's had a pretty good season, but there is also going to be the thing. Well, last year, because they didn't have Middleton, because they didn't have Ingles, Crowder, all these guys, all of a sudden you got Grayson Allen trying to defend Tatum and Brown, and it's just not going to end well. So I think they're in a better position for purely the Boston series, but the guard depth is not great. And Javon Carter, he's a pretty good, he'll defend full court, but he doesn't have the size. So again, it's challenging against Boston that is going to be big throughout. And then the other question is, you got to have concern about who's behind Brook Lopez. Bobby Portis is there, but we saw in previous years he didn't play in a series against Boston. He was unplayable defensively. So I think that they've really loaded up in the sort of 2 to 4 position, or really 3 to 4 position. I think they can play small with Giannis, with different guys, but the guard depth and really no backup behind Brook Lopez is still cause for some concern, I would say.
Yeah, and of course, like, Brook is the guy we probably haven't talked enough about within this conversation, because Brook has been great this year. He has been absolutely phenomenal on defense. He will be a top 3 finalist for Defensive Player of the Year, I would think. Offensively, he's been efficient, is the way to put it. 51% from the field, 37% from 3, taking 5 threes a game now, which is big. It's really, really going to come down to matchups. Like, the thing that we didn't really talk about is Milwaukee's defense against Philadelphia's offense. When we talked about those two teams in comparison to one another, Brook Lopez is one of the ideal guys that you would want to have on Joel Embiid for the most part, at least to make his life harder. So that's one place where this could be really, really beneficial. I really do. That might be the series I want most in the playoffs, if I'm being completely honest. I think I want Milwaukee and Philadelphia to play. I think that is what I need. I need to see those two teams best on best. Just let it rock. I need to see it.
And they don't really like each other. They've had some pretty fiery matchups over the last few years, and they just haven't been able to have this collision course. We thought we were going to get it in 2021, and then Atlanta beat the Sixers, and that was probably the conference finals everyone wanted to see. So, yeah, it looks like they're on course to play each other, but we've thought that before, so we'll see. But, yeah, the Embiid and Brook Lopez stuff would be interesting. The interesting thing with Boston, and I don't know when we're going to get to Boston. You haven't told me whether they're 2 or 1. We will see.
Boston is not next, but we can talk about them now.
Just because of the Rob Williams stuff with Boston and Milwaukee is also interesting, because in a lot of ways, Boston, you can make the case, to me at least, are better off not playing Rob Williams against the Bucks, because then it becomes difficult to have Brook Lopez on the floor, and without Brook Lopez on the floor, the Bucks are very vulnerable. Yeah. Like, you can go with Horford, you can go with Grant Williams, and to me, that's more problematic than Rob Williams.
Yeah, I agree with you on that for what it's worth. But we'll talk about Boston here momentarily. The number 2 team is the Phoenix Suns for me. I think this Suns team is just going to be impossible to stop on offense. I actually don't see a way that it's going to work. Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Chris Paul as your 3 guys that can score on pull-ups from 25 feet and in. They can all shoot off the catch. They can all shoot off the dribble. They are all elite at getting to the exact spot that they want. Man, the fact that defenses have to find a way to guard all 3 of those guys, that's what feels impossible to me. Like, instead of Devin Booker getting the best defender night after night after night, like he's gotten for years upon years in Phoenix, he's now getting the second best defender night after night. That trickle-down effect for Kevin Durant is real, as I talked about on the show that I did when the Kevin Durant deal occurred originally. The trickle-down effect with Kevin Durant helping his teammates get better is very real. He's not seen as a guy that's like a super high-level passer playmaker, but he is seen as a guy that, because of the attention he draws, it makes things so much easier for everybody else on the roster. Man, that team's going to be hard to stop.
I agree. And everyone in the East is happy that Kevin Durant got the hell out of there, because no one wanted to see him in the postseason anyway. So, yeah, offensively, that team is going to be crazy. And the trickle-down effect goes all the way to CP3 as well. If he's your 3rd best player, all of a sudden you're feeling pretty good, because you're concerned about like their head to scoring stuff, and we've seen Mikal Bridges, and he's gone off at least in just a couple of games we've seen in Brooklyn. So could he have brought more to the table offensively? Potentially. But if you look at the Clippers and you're like, okay, well, we get stagnant because we've got Paul George and we've got Kawhi Leonard. In Phoenix, first of all, we've seen Kevin Durant work in Golden State, so you're not all that worried about that kind of stuff anyway. But now you've got Chris Paul, who he had 18, 19 assists the other night. Like, how much fun is Chris Paul going to have playing with these two guys in this offense? It's going to be crazy. And then DeAndre Ayton's probably going to be throwing down lobs left, right, and center because everyone's so concerned about Durant and Booker on the wings. So offensively, I can't wait to see it. I agree with you.
DeAndre Ayton should be able to walk in to 18 points a night, just running in transition and catching lobs. It just like literally run hard to the rim every time. That's it. If DeAndre does that, he's going to walk into 18 points and 10 rebounds a night with this team because there's just no attention on him now. There's zero attention. Okay, let's say he runs hard to the rim. Defense has to collapse. Wide open Kevin Durant 3, maybe a wide open Devin Booker 3, if you have them on the same side of where the help has to come from. That's the ball game. Like that's kind of what it comes down to. Like if DeAndre Ayton is just willing to run hard to the rim every time, he's either going to be wide open for a lob because he can high point the ball better than anybody. He's stronger than everybody. Or he is just going to, be wide open at the rim or create a shot for his teammates. It's pretty simple. Like basketball can be a simple game when you have Chris Paul running ball screens next to Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. And oh, by the way, if that ball screen action doesn't work, we'll just throw the ball to Kevin Durant in the mid post. He's shooting 60% from the mid range this year. He's shooting 60% from the mid range. It's a fucking layup for him. It's unbelievable. I don't think we have ever seen an offense that has this much playoff potential since that Warriors team, since that Kevin Durant Warriors team, with all of the spacing with Klay Thompson, Stephen Curry, with Kevin Durant. This team's going to be almost impossible to stop, I think.
So why can't they win it? Health, obviously people who have concern, you need to see it. In theory, this is awesome. The only question I have for you is in terms of so Ayton is obviously in their best five. Let's just say they want to go small, as most teams do. Who you have in that five for Phoenix?
You go Chris Paul, Devin Booker, maybe Terrence Ross with Kevin Durant and Torrey Craig, or Josh Okogie instead of Terrence Ross. If you want to go like super perimeter defense with, Kevin Durant's had a really great defensive year. I've talked about that a lot on the show. I think he's been terrific this year. Okogie has been pretty good leading into the All-Star break. Torrey Craig is a good defender. I think that they can make it work in that way. But here's the other thing too, like DeAndre Ayton gives them the size that they need to match up against guys like Nikola Jokic, who, if you remember, the last time those two played in the playoffs, DeAndre Ayton weirdly won that battle. Like DeAndre Ayton outplayed Nikola Jokic in a playoff series. I don't know how that happened, but he did. And it was like the strangest thing I think I can remember, the year that the Suns made the finals, but it did happen. And at the very least, if DeAndre Ayton can slow down Nikola Jokic, they win that series. I think they win that series pretty easily.
So with all that being said, you clearly have, I don't know whether it's the path to the NBA Finals. I don't know whether it's the individual matchup, but you clearly like what Boston has potentially if you got to that point.
I think Boston is the hardest. I think Boston has the best ability to force mismatches against you while also minimizing mismatches on their own side because of how mobile they are, because of how well spaced the floor is consistently. They can throw out lineups like Derek White, Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Al Horford. They can throw out super small lineups where you replace Horford with Grant Williams in that circumstance. You have Malcolm Brogdon as another big body point guard, essentially, that you can throw in that way. This team, I know that depth has been like a thing for them, but if they're at full strength, they're deeper than anybody in terms of the way that they can cause mismatch problems in the playoffs, particularly once benches shorten a little bit. So, yeah, I think Boston should still be the favorite. I do, because they just cause too many problems. And here's the other thing, too. And I'll ask you this. So, with the Suns, my thought was I can come up with reasons why the Suns won't win the title. Health. I think the chemistry is going to be fine. Kevin Durant has played with both Chris Paul and Devin Booker in Olympics before, separate Olympics, but like I think there's going to be some synergy and chemistry there, even just beyond Kevin Durant being like the most unselfish superstar that you'll find just in terms of like touches and everything. I can't really like give you a full ironclad case why Boston can't win the title. I think that like Robert Williams maybe not being on the court makes their defense a little bit worse. This is why I wanted to ask you, what is your case for why Boston can't win the title? Because mine feel very nitpicky in a way that it doesn't feel as nitpicky for Phoenix.
I don't know, man. I mean, you can because the problem is Rob Williams missed the first part of the season and the defense was still great. I mean, you've already pointed to the guys they can go small with. You can play Horford at the 5 which actually creates more problems for teams that they might face in the postseason. Again, namely Milwaukee. How does that look against Philly? I'm not sure, but Rob Williams plays in that series, and then you've got some pretty handy backup. The guard stuff. Marcus Smart obviously has been huge for this team, but they got Brogdon for not much. Derek White is now an Eastern Conference Player of the Week somehow. I mean, all this shit has just like continued to happen. So I don't really have a reason why they can't win it, other than they run into Milwaukee and Giannis averages 40 and 20. Yeah. Or they play the Phoenix Suns, and we've already spoken about the offensive stuff, and they can be as good as they want defensively, but the Suns might just be better offensively. But they're top 3 in offense and defense. I think they're their deepest team. I think they're the most complete team. I don't know, man. I really don't have a great reason outside of they come up against a superstar going absolutely ballistic.
In minutes that Robert Williams has played this season, they have a 108 defensive rating, which would be best in the league. In minutes where Al Horford and Robert Williams play together, they've only played 214 minutes. Do you know what their defensive rating is in those minutes?
I'm assuming it must be pretty good, like 10. I mean, it's a very small sample size, but 101, 102.
100 on the dot. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely insane. That is like the Celtics are top 3 in defense right now with like a 111 defensive rating. If you put those two together because of how smart they are, because of how rangy they are, and then you throw them with 3 great perimeter defenders like you're going to do with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, Derek White. There's no point where they're not going to have 3 great perimeter defenders out there with that duo. Grant Williams, you can throw out there. Even like Malcolm Brogdon, he's a little bit slow, but he's fucking huge. I mean, like you've seen Malcolm quite a bit. Like, I think people don't really recognize how big Malcolm is, like until you stand next to him almost.
Long arms,
like he's long arms, enormous hands, huge shoulders. Like, he can guard up the lineup pretty easily. So I struggle to find answers, I guess. I really, really struggle to find the answers on why the Celtics shouldn't be the favorite. And I think they should be the favorite. You're right. Maybe they run into Kevin Durant and Kevin Durant just goes like super God mode, right? Because sometimes Kevin Durant just does that. Didn't do it against the Celtics last year.
Yeah, and are there other reasons? I mean, we saw that they actually did struggle offensively last year in that series against Milwaukee. I think Milwaukee had a 97 defensive rating. It was a super physical, super slow series. To me, what was the difference? And again, Middleton wasn't there. Why was the reason that Boston won the series? Yeah, Grant Williams hit a bunch of open corner threes in Game 7. But I go back to Game 6 because Jason Tatum went absolutely ballistic in the fourth quarter in Milwaukee. So they were in serious trouble in that series. So the team is... You look at guys that have made improvements and the guys they've added, Brogdon, of course, they're not unbeatable because I guess the question that the reason why we're saying Kevin Durant can go crazy and Giannis can go crazy is because Jason Tatum's had a huge season. Is he going to have that type of playoff run where he gets through multiple playoff series against these guys that have already won multiple MVPs? I guess that's a real question as well.
Yeah, like Jason Tatum is a top 6 player in the league.
Yeah.
Kevin Durant might be better. Giannis might be better, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have those two guys that you have to run through in the playoffs, and they might not have to run through Kevin Durant now. Like Joel Embiid might be better. That's a very distinct possibility. He might have to run through 3 guys in the playoffs where he's not the best player on the court. He might be the best player on the court though in a couple of those series.
And
like
by the end of it, he definitely could be, like,
yeah, like this is his chance. This is actually like the Jason Tatum year. People talked about the way that he emerged last season into being that true top 7, top 8 player in the league. This is the one where he can emerge into being like a top 3 player in the league. Undeniably, unquestionably. Maybe not undeniably, because people will still argue about this forever and ever, because that's what people do. But this is his year. If they win the title on his back and he averages 32 points a game in the playoffs, which distinct possibility, I mean, it's going to be hard to deny him as being like kind of the king of the castle.
Yeah, and I've been pretty strong. And you mentioned last year where he sort of emerged. I mean, I've been pretty strong that everyone's been way too quick with Tatum to say he's like an MVP guy. He's this. They've been trying to do it for years, and I think it's been over the top. And we get why it's Boston, all those types of things. But the other reason why I think people have done that is just because it's pretty rare that guys that young are exposed to the conference finals so young. And because he did it straight away, all of a sudden it feels like we've been waiting for Jason Tatum to get to that point. And it's like, no. He's actually just done it way before most guys ever get there. Yeah. And was he the best player? And not always the best player on those teams. But the point is, he just got that playoff. He's got postseason experience that I don't know what the numbers actually suggest, but he's on a pretty, feels like would be a pretty rare pace for sort of playoff games at the age he's at.
Yeah, I mean, Giannis, Jason Tatum turns 25, I think, like in 2 or 3 days, right?
Right.
Giannis finally got to the, I think, conference finals. He was either 24 or 25 for the first time, if I remember correctly, right? That was in 2019. You'll know that better than I do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the fact that Jason Tatum's played in a bunch of those series already, sometimes is the best player in the series, sometimes is not the best player in that series. It's critical. It's been critical to his development, I think, as much as anything, but it's also been critical to why people are willing to anoint him as quickly as they have been. I think Giannis is a better player than Jason Tatum right now. I do, if I'm being completely honest. There's no more dominant force than Giannis. But in this playoff series, we'll see. I mean, does Giannis have to take on the Jason Tatum assignment for the Milwaukee Bucks?
And this is why it's been fascinating in years gone by. And not having Middleton last year did hurt a little bit, again, because there was just mismatches all over. And Middleton is not an elite defender at this point anymore. There was a stage where he was, but I've been saying for a few years, I do think his playoff defense goes up significantly. I mean, he's been a guy that has guarded Kevin Durant. He also will chase around, guards in the perimeter. So I think his defense goes to a different level. So Middleton will get a crack. Obviously, Drew Holiday gets a crack. Now, the Crowder one is interesting. I don't know. What's your take on Crowder? I'll ask you. We discussed him briefly again, but
I mean, I think I don't know. I was not a fan of what I saw last year. I thought he was a step slow defensively last year in terms of lateral quickness. Like, I think he's better suited to guard up the lineup more so than like take on really truly difficult defensive assignments. Like, I think if he is asked to handle Jason Tatum, that will go poorly for Milwaukee. If he's asked to be like okay, we have to have somebody that's on Jaylen Brown, and then we're going to throw Giannis on Jason Tatum, or we're going to throw Drew Holiday on Jaylen Brown, and maybe have Jay Crowder be like the guy that's defending Malcolm Brogdon or something like that. I think he can do that really well, and he can shoot, and like he'll be effective in that regard. He'll be useful for sure. It's just it'll be useful from a lineup versatility perspective as opposed to like being out there and like really killing it, I feel.
I agree with you there. And that's why I just wanted to ask that, because obviously we get people that say, well, it's like, this is PJ Tucker. And I'm like, okay, let's just cool the Jets. Let's cool the Jets on that one.
He's just different. Like he's not as good of an on-ball defender as PJ is, which was a role that was super, super important, but he does allow them to go small, which is helpful. The problem is he's just not going to be as equipped to take on those like incredibly difficult assignments, which means Giannis might have to. Having said that, Jay will be more effective offensively. So it's a mix and match. It's different, but he'll help, I think, as long as he's like not totally cooked, right? Like I guess there's a non-zero chance he's totally cooked after having not played for a year, but I don't think he's totally cooked. Do you?
Not really, but I guess we're going to find out. And honestly, the ultimate test will be in this series if we get it, which we think we might in the conference finals. That's when you'll be able to get your definitive answer on the Jay Crowder experience.
Well, I'm looking forward to the conference semifinals with the Sixers and Bucks, where we get the Spider-Man meme of Jay Crowder and PJ Tucker.
Well, yeah, that'll be something. But as you said, hey, if Jay Crowder is willing to take a couple of shots, maybe scores 3 to 4 points, he's going to be probably beating the production of our old friend there in Philadelphia.
I think Jay can probably score 8 or 9. Like I think that's the big thing. Like I think he can get you 8 or 9 again.
Well, he's going to shoot. We know that.
He'll definitely shoot. He's confident. He's aggressive. I respect it. I do respect it. And plus, you know what? You're bringing a legend home. You're bringing a legendary Milwaukee King who went to Marquette, won Big East Player of the Year. You gotta love it. This is great. It's a great homecoming.
I don't have the Marquette tie, Sam, as you know, so I was significantly less excited than many of the locals were. But you're right. There's some Jay Crowder stands.
Well, you might get some magic. You might get that Marquette magic back. You know, that's right. What we're looking for here. Kane, do you have anything else you want to chat about before we get out of here?
Not really, other than I will say, look, when you go through these tiers and you sort of discuss some of the matchups that we are going to get, I hope everyone's healthy, because there's some years where you look at the matchups and you're like, I'm just not 100% sure, particularly with the West. I just think it's going to be crazy. I think it's going to be crazy. So I am just really excited to get these next 20 games out of the way and see what we come up with.
The West is going to be an absolute bloodbath. The East second round, though, I think is like the thing I'm most looking forward to. NBA Finals, you go every other night, maybe once every 3 nights in some cases, right? The East Finals is going to be every single night, just an absolute bloodbath. Or the East semifinals is just going to be an absolute bloodbath every night, especially if we get like one of Miami or Cleveland playing some of those teams. Like I think that could be really, really fun.
It's a good point you make. And just as I look at the standings, I realized that these tiers, there was a significant anti-New York bias in your tiers. What's going on for the Nets and Knicks fans? They've been hanging on.
I mean, do we need to talk about the Nets? Like they're going to take a step back. Like they don't have enough offensive firepower, I don't think. They'll make the playoffs. I think they'll be in the play-in tournament, but they'll be in it, I think. The Knicks, I mean, look, I think people who listen to this show know that I adore watching this New York Knicks team. I probably would have them like 14 or 15. I think when I did this little exercise, I had them 15th. I think I had who did I have ahead of them outside of the 13 we talked about? It was no, I might have had them 14th. I think I did have them 14th now that I say that. I love this team. I think they're terrific. I just think that they're going to be too easy to cause mismatches against in the playoffs. This is a big team that like just kind of, you're going to play Mitchell Robinson and Julius Randle at once. You're going to try and bludgeon teams on the glass, and you're going to hope that you're getting enough playmaking from Jalen Brunson and Emmanuel Quickley and Quentin Grimes and RJ Barrett. I love that team. I love them. I just think that it's going to be hard for them to win in the playoffs.
Very fair. Very fair. I don't disagree with it. I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm sorry, Knicks fans. I do genuinely, I love your team. I do. They're one of my favorite teams to watch right now. Emmanuel Quickly's leap, like they can defend at a super high level on the perimeter. You can play like super fun lineups with Jalen Brunson, Emmanuel Quickly, Quentin Grimes, and then have Julius Randle like at the 5. Have Josh Hart out there, just go like full energy and aggression and try and make that work. They have some lineup versatility that could be fun. They could win a playoff series. I just don't think they can win 4 of them.
I just can't disagree with you, Sam. I can't. I would like to, but you're spot
on. I wish I could disagree with myself on the Knicks. I would love this team to be great. I genuinely love watching this team. They like embody everything about Tom Thibodeau, and like they have fun shot creators, and like they are a weird team in the way that I enjoy weird teams. But yeah, it's not good enough. Kane, tell the people where they can find your work. Tell the people what's going on. Tell the people all about Kane Pitman.
Look, I'm just lurking on Twitter for the most part at Kane Pitman. You can get me there, and that's where I send most of my stuff, Sam. So that's where I'm hanging out most of the time. We do Locked On Bucks daily for sure, and then I do a heap of Australian basketball stuff that, let's face it, a lot of your viewers and listeners may not know what the heck I'm talking about anyway. So I don't know how much interest they have in it, but we talk basketball. We watch basketball every day. What else would you want to do?
It's a great job. You can go find Kane on ESPN Australia. You can go find Kane on his Twitter feed. Kane will post a lot of his videos and segments that he does over on Australia, ESPN on his Twitter feed. Some of them are really fun. I enjoy the Fire Pit segment every week. I think it's just a weird, fun thing that is just enjoyable to watch every single time. So I'd suggest people go check that out. Kane and Copes. Yell out some of the other podcast stuff that even American people can find.
Yeah, we got 2 TV shows. We got The Jump, and if you're in America, you'll find that, listen, is it interesting that the ESPN Australia went back in with The Jump? But they did. We got The Jump every Wednesday night, Kane and Copes every Wednesday night, which is me and Leonard Copeland, who's a legend in Australian basketball over here. He's an American guy, spent some time in the NBA as well back in the 90s. So Kane and Copes is on TV, but you can get it on the ESPN Australia YouTube page, though. So if you ever want to just jump on and have a look at that, it's a bit of fun. We have a laugh.
That's the whole point. I enjoy Kane because he's all about having fun with this thing, which is great. I don't have anything written this week because I'm working through draft guide stuff. I've written 4 draft guide profiles already this week, which is good. What else? I do have a top 100 that I think is going to come next week, not this week. I'm finally going to release my top 100 draft rankings. I think I haven't done it since like the preseason maybe, but sorry, apologies. I've done mock drafts. You guys probably know where I stand. You guys listen to the show. Go subscribe to the Game Theory Podcast with Sam Vecini over on YouTube. Go subscribe on Apple, Spotify, whatever podcasting platform you use. Use that code Game Theory to subscribe to The Athletic. And until next time, we'll talk soon.